Ko te kohi Ringahuia Delamere, te mema tuatahi o tahahi ringatu no ngati paiakau ki te whānau apanui. Ia mua ia ngā rori arihi a Nikarima no ngati Patamoana ki te Whakatohea. Ka puta ko Waihana Ringahuia Delamere. Ko Waihana ia mua ia tiaria Wikiriwhi no ngati wāhiao me tūhaurangi ki whakarewarewa. Ka puta ko Ringahuia Tuariki Delamere. Ko Ringahuia ia mua ia Dorothy Eileen Francis no ngati Ingarani ki Blackheath, London. Ka puta ko au, ko Tuariki Delamere. No reira kia kau te whānau ngā hapu katoa o te Whakatohea, ngā mihi, ngā mihi, ngā mihi ni a koutou. Kia ora everybody, my name is Tuariki Delamere. The reason I'm making this video is to explain to you why myself and Te Ringahuia Hata today have sought an urgent hearing at the Waitangi Tribunal concerning the mandate for Whakatohea for settling our treaty claim Y87. For those of you who don't know me, my background in the treaty settlement goes back to about 1990 when I was manager of treaty negotiations for the Treaty of Waitangi Policy Unit at the Department of Justice, these days known as Te Arawhiti. I was approached by the late Karauria Edwards, the chairman of the Whakatohea Māori Trust Board and the chairman of the Whakatohea Negotiating Committee back then, and asked to provide advice, and I did that. I was able to do that because somehow it slipped my mind to tell my Pākehā bosses at the treaty unit that besides being Te Whānau Apanui, I was also Te Whakatohea. And so for a couple of years I would give Claude advice and discuss matters with him. In 1993, I was appointed as regional director for Te Puni Kōkiri, based out of the Whakatane office. And during that time, I was then asked by the Whakatohea Negotiating Committee and the Trust Board, would I take over the role of the secretary for the Negotiating Committee. And I did this for about a year until Claude Karauria suffered a severe stroke. And following that, I was appointed project director and assisted by Tu Whakaitiora Williams. And we took the claim forward, and in September 1996, we initialed a settlement subject to ratification by Te Whakatohea for our claim. As you're all aware, that didn't go ahead. The tribe rejected it a couple of years later. And ironically, I was no longer involved because as a cabinet minister for the government, it was probably not appropriate given the conflict of interest. Anyway, in the 2000s, I forget exactly when, another group, now known as the Whakatohea Pre-Settlement Claims Trust, established themselves to try and get the claims settled. And this is the body that has been largely known as pushing the claim forward. And several years ago, the government granted them or recognized them as the mandated people of Whakatohea. And that set up a can of worms because there were many within Whakatohea who disagreed with that. And subsequently 13 claimant groups, separate claimant groups independent of Whakatohea, went to the tribunal, and in their in the hearing of that claim, the tribunal provided a report which said that the claims trust mandate was flawed and should never have been granted. And so today I want to explain why myself and Te Ringahuia have gone back to the tribunal. So that's the question for today. Why am I challenging the mandate claim by the Whakatohea Pre-Claims Trust that has been recognized by the Crown? First, let me take you back to the findings of the Waitangi Tribunal on the mandate claim about 3 or 4 years ago. And I'll just read several paragraphs of their decision. Our primary finding is that the Crown prioritized its political objective of concluding treaty settlements by mid-2020 over a process that was fair to Whakatohea. This meant that Whakatohea were included in the, quote, broadening the reach end quote, strategy and given priority status in the 2017 negotiation timetable at a time when substantial division within the iwi was apparent. The decision to recognise the pre-settlement trust mandate was therefore not fair, reasonable, and made in good faith, and breaches the treaty principle of partnership. What this means is that the tribunal recognised that the Crown decided to hell with the other groups within Whakatohea. They were putting their money on one particular group, and the tribunal has called the Crown out for that. And then they go on to say, we find that the Crown did not sufficiently inform itself of the true levels of support and opposition to the pre-settlement trust mandate prior to recognition, and thereby breached the treaty principle of active protection. And I can tell you, having been a manager for the Crown some 30 odd years ago, that that sort of attitude is deliberate within the Treaty Settlement Office, Tarawhiti. They don't work for the betterment of iwi, of the claimants. They're working for their masters, the Pākehā government. Then the tribunal goes on, we find that the Crown failed to act reasonably when it approved a mandate that contains a withdrawal mechanism it acknowledges to be unfair, and failing to appropriately recognise hapu rangatiratanga in this way, the Crown has breached the treaty principle of active protection. And that's why Te Ringahuia and I are going back to the tribunal seeking a decision hearing, because they're still doing this. And continuing, the right thing to do is to honour the treaty commitment and not let political expediency subordinate the difficult and at times onerous task of upholding and maintaining a relationship based on utmost good faith. Where the historical wrongs are grievous, and they sure as hell are grievous within Whakatohea, and the contemporary hapu politics complex and divided, and yeah, we all know that's to be true as well. The honour of the Crown requires statesmanship over pragmatism, and that's where the Crown's failing. This includes advocacy for taking the time required to get it right. When the Crown reacts to political pressure to get it done, it is Māori who suffer from the divisive and unfair process that follows. Now, this is what the tribunal recommended should be done. They recommended, as we all know, that a vote be taken, and that vote process was done, what was it, 2018, I think. Anyway, the tribunal says the access provided to the returning officer to these roles would be for the sole purpose of enabling all adult members of Whakatohea to vote on the following questions. 1, do you support the WPSCT continuing to negotiate to reach a settlement with the Crown of the historical treaty grievances of Whakatohea? Yes or no? And if you said no to question 1, then you would answer the second question, which is, do you see the current treaty negotiations stopped in order? A, that a mandate process be rerun from the start? Answer, yes or no. Or that the Waitangi Tribunal can carry out an inquiry into the historical grievances of Whakatohea, yes or no. Now, my reading of that is, if you say no to question 1, you get to answer either question 2A or question 2B, because at the end of 2A there, the word says or, doesn't say and. So, going back, there's the tribunal's question 1. Do you support the Whakatohea Pre-Settlement Claims Trust continuing to negotiate? Yes or no? And for those of you who answered no to question 1, and only for those who answered no to question 1, you people, and only you people, got to answer question 2. So if you said yes to question 1, you weren't entitled to vote on question 2. That's pretty straightforward from what the tribunal was saying. And then the second question was, do you wish to see the current treaty negotiations stopped in order? That a mandate process be rerun from the start, yes or no? Or do you want the Waitangi Tribunal to first carry out an inquiry into the historical grievances of Whakatohea? You get to answer one of those two questions, because you can't rerun the process from the start if you're also going to have a tribunal inquiry going on. And if you have a tribunal inquiry, you can't do the mandate process. You got to wait for the inquiry to finish. So you get to answer, if you said no to one, you get to answer either 2A or 2B. So there we go. But as we all know, that's not what happened. And that's why I'm here today. So let's look at the voting form and let's see what actually happened. There's the voting form. Most of you have seen it, most of you filled it in. Well, at least 2,876 of you did. And here's the first big problem. See there on the left-hand side, the word or. That's not what the tribunal said. The way that voting form is put to us is you get the vote on question 1, or you get the vote on question 2, 2A, 2B. And that is not what the tribunal said. As you remember, you got the vote, and if you answered yes, you only did 1. And if you answered no, you could then go on to 2A and 2B. So right then and there, that big word or in red background, white lettering, makes the whole voting process invalid, totally invalid. And I am very confident, 100% confident, this ever ends up in the High Court. The High Court will take about 2 seconds and they will support my position. Now here's the result of the Whakatohea mandate vote. And these are the figures from Election Z. That's the organization that conducted this voting process. And as you can see, a total of 2,876 people voted. 1,534 of them voted yes, 1,192 said no, and evenly 150 people messed up their vote somehow. Now, look at that figure of no for question 1, 1,192. Those were the only people who were entitled to go on to answer question 2A or 2B. But see, here's the problem. Just look at column question 2B. 1,903 people voted on question 2B. But how can that be? There's only 1,192 allowed to vote on either of them. And 2A, 1,765 voted, which means not only did people who voted yes go and vote on question 2A and 2B, obviously a whole bunch of people voted on both 2A and 2B when you could only vote on one of them if you're in the 1,192. So the whole voting process was a complete, total nonsense. Okay. And, you know, up to 2,876 people voted on question 2, according to these figures. So who's to blame for this mess? Okay. Who should take responsibility? Let me tell you who. Starting off with the Honourable Andrew Little, the Minister Treaty Negotiations. Now, Andrew, while he may not have been actively personally involved in all this, he would have received the Cabinet Committee papers. And he's the Minister of Treaty Negotiations, so he takes ultimate responsibility. You know, the buck stops at his table. Second is this organisation called Election NZ. They're the ones that came up with this voting process, this form. They're the ones who actually screwed up in the beginning. They definitely take responsibility. And their employee, Anthony Morton, he was the returning officer they appointed to oversee the whole thing. But you know, Mr. Morton, why did you let it go ahead? Surely you would have checked that the form was correct, but you didn't, obviously. Or if you did, you didn't have the competence to work out it was wrong. Te Arawhiti, the Crown itself, you guys would have had that form. You guys didn't even bother checking it either. No one checked it. And Justice retired Rhys Harrison, lovely, lovely man. I met him at Glen Eden for the first time, what, 2 or 3 years ago. Retired High Court Justice. He was there to oversee the process because of, you know, his experience and reputation as being a High Court judge. But, Justice Harrison was too busy, wallowing in the glory of cultural learning as he went from marae to marae, hui to hui. He didn't do his job. He didn't check out, one, the tribunal report and what they actually wrote and recommended for the vote, and didn't then link that into the voting process, the form. If he had, he would have realised it was a cock-up. So he didn't do anything either. And the Waitangi Tribunal themselves, they've been aware of this. No one there checked either. And of course, our relations who were sitting on the Whakatohea Pre-Settlement Claims Trust, they didn't check. They didn't realise it was cocked up. And going back to the Pre-Settlements Trust, before I get to Jason Poe, when the voting form came out, myself and a bunch of others contacted them and says, hey, this voting form is wrong. It's a nonsense. It means nothing. They went ahead with it. They didn't want to know. They, along the rest of them, are the proverbial ostriches with their heads stuck in the sand. And finally, Jason Poe, a lawyer from Ngāpui. Whakatohea paid him tens and tens of thousands of dollars to negotiate for us. I don't think he hasn't done a bad job. He's done a great job as far as I'm concerned. But, we've got heaps and heaps of highly skilled, highly experienced young rangatahi people out there, lawyers, accountants, in all sorts of occupations, doctors, quite capable of negotiating for Whakatohea. The last thing we need is someone from Ngāpui. When Ngāpui, they're probably in a deeper hole than we are in Whakatohea as far as getting their act together. So I'm still opposed to us continuing with Jason Poe as our negotiator. I just find it an insult to all of us, So those are the people who are to blame, okay? And that is why Ringahuia and I have gone to the tribunal, because this matter of mandate hasn't been sorted out, not as yet. So here we are. I'm sitting here in the Waitangi on the farm. I wish I was sitting in front of Rumoko at Waiawa, but never mind. And the reason that Ringahuia and I are going to the tribunal seeking decision hearing goes back in January. I met with the trust, the Whakatohea Pre-Settlement Claims Trust, and I thanked them for that opportunity. We met on a Sunday afternoon in a Portiki. And I told them, look, you guys, I'm not part of any of those 13 mandated claims that went, to the tribunal 3 or 4 years ago. But whether you like it or not, they won the case. The tribunal said, you guys don't have a mandate. Now, you keep trying to tell me and everyone that you've been meeting with people and trying to sort it out. No, you haven't. Having hui, where every man and his dog is attending these hui, isn't what you do, giving each of the claimants a couple of minutes. What you need to do is you got to sit down, as I told you in the Porigi, you got to sit down with each of those 13 individual claimant groups and one-on-one try and work out how you can move forward and settle the issues that these other groups have. You've got the facilities there at the trust board in the Portigi. Make sure you record it. And if you can sort it out, that's great. If you can't, you've got it on record. You can go back to the tribunal and tell them what you've done. And after you've met all those 13, before you go to the tribunal, then have a huiaiwi and tell us what you've done. And for that huiaiwi, let me suggest we don't hold it on any of our marae, because that just brings out the battle calls from other marae who think they should have it on their marae. My suggestion is let's have it in the main hall there at Portiki College. That's Whakatohea ground. That's our whenua. But more importantly, it's an independent place where we can all come together and let's try and resolve this, because we need to resolve this mandate issue, because if we don't, we're not going to settle our claim. We're going to be in the High Court. And we're just going to be spending, and never settling. Anyway, those are my thoughts for the day, and that's why Te Ringahuia and I have gone back to the tribunal today. Nō reira, kia koutou te whānau, ka hapu katoa o te Whakatohea. Ngā mihi, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā